The purpose of today's video clip is to show you how to interpret compliance of a management system using Elint software. And basically what I'm going to do is run through the flow of how I would set up an Elint site for a client. The site we're going to have a look at today is compliant to various pieces of legislation, which the Occupational Health and Safety Act is one, including the regulations that they need to implement, as well as ISO 9001 and ISO 45001. What we have done is we've created an integrated management system. So you won't necessarily see the separate ISO 9000 separate from 45,000, but what you will see is an integrated system. And I'm going to go through the flow of how to implement, not the actual know-how. So if you want to see how a specific module works, please visit that specific module's tutorial so that you can see how to capture something into a specific module or how the module works. The idea of this video is just to show you how to populate or interpret a management system using the Elint software. The first thing, obviously, that we need to do is we need to create a company profile. So I'm showing you the company profile that we're going to work with today. And the company profile is we create a company in the back end under companies, and then we have to link a site to that specific company profile. You will not be able to see the front end unless if you created a site. So it's important to make sure that you have a site also created. The next thing that you can do also in this section is if you have multiple sites in one company. So say for instance, you have depots that's doing transport on the one side and you have landfills which doing landfill operations. You need to capture all those physical sites as a physical Elint site, but then you can link them to BUs. So if you have multiple sites, you can create a BU section here so that you can pull the sites together when you do your dashboards into BUs and do dashboards for BU, but site specific as well. Once you've created your company, linked your sites, linked your BUs, you can create your contacts. So under contacts, make sure that you select the company. I'm just going to quickly show you the actual site so that you can see we have captured all the users that's using the Elint site for this specific company. Initially, you might find that you don't know all the users that's going to use the system. But you're going to have to start capturing some users because you won't be able to assign any management measures or any checklists to specific people if you don't actually capture them in Elint. So even if it's just the main people initially, you can always come back and add users to the system. Also, please go and have a look at the tutorial. We talk about how to assign the permissions to every user, who's got administrative rights and how to assign the administrative rights, and how to assign specific rights to specific people doing specific tasks in Elint. So it's important to set up your users correctly. But please remember, you can always come back and add or change any detail of a user if you need to. Also, just for interest sake, if a user leaves the company and you delete that user, you don't actually physically delete the user out of the system. It just means you won't see that user anymore, but the user itself will stay in the system. The login will be inactive, so that user won't be able to use the login. But the name of that user will stay in the system, as there might have been records created by this user and we don't want to use the user's detail and his name. The next thing you need to do, and this is where I like to start, is the check activity templates. So we're still in the back end where the administrator works. Now, 90% of the clients on Elint had some form of manual system before they used Elint. So there is a risk assessment. Sometimes the risk assessment was incomplete, or it wasn't sufficient, or I didn't agree with the way they did the risk assessment. And sometimes the risk assessment was perfectly well and we just used it the way it was. And then I also have clients in Elint, a few, which do not want to use the risk assessment module. They still use their own risk assessment matrix with their own Excel spreadsheet, which is not a problem. If you do that, then you can skip this part. Just remember that risk assessment is going to be the basis on which you're going to create your management system. Now, irrespective of you using Elint or not, your management system is the controls that was identified in your risk assessment. It's the controls that you need to implement from a legal perspective. And that is why I start with this risk assessment, so that I can get to the controls that we need to develop or that we need to implement to make sure that those controls are actually implemented, monitored, and acted upon. So the very first thing you can do if you don't have a risk assessment is you can download the template, or you can just upload a template that you already created. So normally what I do is I download the template, I complete that CSV. So all I do is I convert the client's current risk assessment into the CSV template. And in doing that, I also audit that risk assessment to make sure that it does actually make sense and it reads easier going forward when we do the actual implementation of the controls. So if I go back to our client that we're looking at, I'm just going to take one of their risk assessments. So this is a template. They had a risk assessment, so we interpreted their risk assessment into Elint and we brought it into the back end, so it's available for the users to use in the front end with their controls. So you can see I reworked the controls because first of all, I've put in the legal controls that they are in the specific risk assessment, and then also where they had a specific procedure or work instruction, I actually put the number with it because it reads easier if we go to the front end. I will show you how that all works together. So that's the risk assessment templates that we create. Once I create the risk assessment templates, if the client is using any monthly reporting or any monitoring report, you can make a decision if that client needs a monitoring report to be created. So this specific client, we created a monitoring report for them, just tracking the lost time injury rate. So we created a monitoring report for them. There's various monitoring reports. So you're going to have to look at your business and say, what is it that we want to monitor? And I'm just quickly going to show you another client. They have quite a few monitoring reports if you look at it in this way. If we look at the production stats, you can see they have a huge monitoring report. They also have a microbial test results, so lab results, which they do. So you can see your monitoring reports can be anything from a lab testing, so for instance, your swabs that you take, or it can be tracking your carbon footprint. So anything that contributes to carbon footprint, you can track by putting in a monitoring report together. You can do your production, like you've seen this company is doing their production. You can do your lost time, your hours that you track. Whatever currently you track as a monitoring report, you can interpret it in Elint. Again, if you're not sure about your monitoring reports, then you don't have to do it now. You can always come back and add a monitoring report if you want to. So that is the main section that we do in the back end once we start setting up a company. So I'm going to go into the front end of this client so that you can see we've done the risk assessment in the back end. So the next step is to pull that risk assessment into the front end. So again, if you're not sure about the functionality of the risk assessment, please go and have a look at tutorials for the risk assessment, and then you'll see how to actually pull it in and do the rating of the specific risk assessment. If you're not sure how the matrix work, or you've got an audit and you need to explain to the auditor, you can download the matrix as well. However, let's just have a look at this risk assessment. So we've done this risk assessment, we've got our hazards, we've got our risks. Now we have our controls. The controls is the actual management system that forms your management system. So if we look at, let's have a look at the work instruction 07 that says that there's housekeeping that needs to be done. Okay, so we have a work instruction that was created in this management system. The work instruction, all your documentation for your management system will sit under documents. So if I go to documents and I actually go to this specific work instruction, it's work instruction 07. So I'm obviously know where I saved everything. So here's my work instruction 7. So you can see the risk assessment identify the work instruction 7. And this risk assessment will identify all the numbers in this documented management measure or documented management system, because that's where I got it from. There was a risk. We said we're going to do housekeeping, and we created a work instruction for the housekeeping. And it might look strange why we have a housekeeping work instruction, but it's because this specific company work with different chemicals. So we have a huge risk if chemicals are not stored correctly and if there's incompatibility with the chemicals. So that's why there's a work instruction for the storage and the housekeeping specifically for those chemicals. I know because I've written the procedure, there's a checklist to housekeeping. So somebody is verifying on a frequent basis that there's actually the housekeeping is actually in order. There's no weeds, it's stored correctly, it's not stored where anything can fall or leak or whatever. So the housekeeping checklist was captured in checklists. So if we go to our checklist, you will see here we have housekeeping checklist, including the storage area. There's actually more than one checklist, but I know about this one checklist, so I'm just going to show you this. So we know that they're checking the housekeeping on a frequent basis. Now, for us to actually track and see that this is done and that work instruction is actually fully implemented to control the risk that we identified, we created the CMS. So the CMS is where the client gets the notification, or the user, that he needs to go and do something specific. He needs to do this housekeeping inspection. Let's just find out where it is. It was 05K. So here's my housekeeping inspection. So that the users that we link to this specific CMS will get that email saying the housekeeping inspection needs to be done. The checklist is also assigned to the specific people, so that they only see the specific checklist that's assigned to them. And once Elint tells the user, you need to go and do the housekeeping inspection, the person that received that email from Elint CMS or management measure, they will go into checklists. They will go into my checklist. Now you can see my checklist doesn't show under mine because I'm logged in as a master. But once you have a checklist like this one that's linked to a management measure, you also have to assign it to that specific users so that they don't see everything. They only see the actual checklist that's assigned to them. So if they open up their checklist, they go into my checklist and they will only have 4 or 5 checklists instead of having 5 pages full of different checklists, like all your audit checklists and everything else we use in the system. So again, you must make sure that the management measure that's created for a specific user, if there's a checklist assigned to that person, you need to assign that checklist specifically to the user as well. Now, once the user complete the checklist in Elint, it will mark off the monitoring section. So if we go back to that specific checklist, inspections. So if we look at K, there's my housekeeping inspections. If I click on this, you can see they have used their checklist to use that specific or show Elint that they've actually done the specific check. So this is a checklist used that they in Elint checklists. And that's how the flow works. It doesn't matter what you do. If there's a document to it, to the risk controls, it will be captured as a document. If there is a checklist linked to a specific control, it will be captured as a checklist. Both the document and the checklist will be managed through the CMS. So our work instruction that we captured under documents will have a CMS that will notify the user when that work instruction is up for review. And that's how we use the risk assessment to create the base of your compliance management system, or your integrated management system, if I can put it that way. Then there might be aspects which are not listed in your risk assessment. So say, for instance, you are compliant to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and you need to do a check meeting. So let's just take this communication check meeting. So there's my check meeting that needs to be done on a frequent basis that you set it up. This company says they do it on a quarterly basis. You can see they've already failed it once, so they're actually in partial non-compliance. Now, what happens with the check meeting is they have a physical check meeting, and then once they complete the check meeting, or normally what we do is in the check meeting, we'll have certain actions. So while everybody is discussing everything, I will sit and I will capture those actions. So I will go into Elint, I will capture the name. So I would say check meeting, and I normally put the date so that it's easier to follow. And then we'll put the specific requirement. So let's say, for instance, the check meeting discussed the ergonomic survey implement mats. Then I can assign it to a specific person. I can give it a priority, and then I can assign it. Now, because it's the check meeting, I assign it as the check meeting, and I give it a due date. If I save this, then it will assign this task. So I don't want to assign it, but this is how we use the system for check meeting. We can also do the same thing. I can say this wasn't a check meeting, this was my management review meeting. We discussed the need for a ergonomic, say, risk assessment, and I assign it to a specific person at a specific date, and in my type, I can go management review. Now, you will notice when we do the tutorials for task and CI, I will tell you that you can, this drop down and the drop downs in the continual improvement can be customized. So you can change this drop down to read what you want to see, the selections you want to do here. So you can do more than just what's here. You can expand on it, or you can change some of the wording in the lists in the back end. That's where the administrator changed the lists. So remember, if you don't want to use, or you don't agree, or you use different terminology when you go to drop downs under tasks and continual improvement, the administrator can go and change that. I don't recommend that you change it immediately. I recommend that you start working with the system, and then as and when you see that you don't agree with the lists, you go and change them. It's just easier because it can get a bit daunting sitting with the lists and you don't even know where they're pulling through. So as you work with the system, you'll identify some of the lists that you want to change. I'm not going to save this because I don't want to create something that is going to confuse them. But I want to show you under dashboards, if you use the system to capture your meetings, you will be able to pull it through as a dashboard so that you can see what was actually, yes, my management review actions that was raised. I can download it, obviously, if I want to, in Excel spreadsheet to see the detail. And I can also change it so that I can only see the ones that are open. But yeah, I can see the management review actions raised per person in the last year. So this is quite nice for auditors as well. And the same thing with shared meetings. If you use the shared meeting option under tasks, it will give you the same. Also, if you have a specific project, you can also identify your tasks per project and manage it in that manner. I also want to show you just quickly the setup of the system. Obviously is complete once you've got all your management measures, you've loaded all your documentation, you start working with your checklist and your risk assessment is populated. Under your checklist, you will have the ability to raise a task out of a checklist that sits under tasks. And again, if you want to see the functionality, please go and have a look at the tutorials. And you will also be able to raise a continual improvement out of checklists. But continual improvement is a record building of anything that needs to be investigated. So it can be an accident, it can be a spill, it can be a injury or fatality, any severity of it. It can be a health risk, noise-induced hearing, or somebody that got sick because of something that they ate at work or anything like that. And it can be a customer complaint, a customer suggestion, a customer compliment. We log compliments in the system as well. There's a functionality or a drop down that you choose, because we need to tell people when something good has happened as well. And all of that pulls through to your dashboards. So again, you have lists here. You can change your list. So your drop downs equals lists. So if you have a drop down in any of our sheets or any of the continual improvement investigation sheets and anything in your tasks, those drop downs is lists in the back end that the administrator can customize for your business. So if I say, I talk about employee first aid, and I talk about contractor first aid in one of the lists. If you just want first aid, you can change it. I also talk about things like fatality. You might want to say, make it broader. So, for instance, you work in a lot of confined spaces. You might want to add asphyxiation to that list. But that's something that you're going to have to start working with and then decide how you want to incorporate the lists or change the lists. Then again, if you want to see how continuous improvement works, please go and visit our tutorials. But this is something that the users will capture manually through the app or manually in the system as and when they get a specific event that needs to be captured. Like we have said, it's either an incident where there's an injury or a customer complaint or even an audit finding. Audit findings work very, very well if you use the checklist as an audit and then select continual improvement, so that it raises immediately a CI. So you don't have to go and manually capture it. And then obviously the system, if any of your CMSs fail, the system actually also raises a continual improvement. Just quickly want to go back to audits. So audit will not necessarily be part of your risk assessment controls. It can be, but say for instance, it's not. And you have specific audits. I just want to quickly run through that with you so that you can also have a look at that. So if I'm saying I want to do, I think my audits would be under the plan. Just bear with me. I'm trying internal IMS audit. You can see there's internal IMS audit. It's actually scheduled for the end of this month. You can see who will receive the audit notification. And then if you go into checklists, just quickly want to show you the actual audit checklists. So here you find the checklists. So I use these checklists, all these checklists, to do my internal audit for this specific company. I go in here and I use these checklists. If I find anything that needs to be addressed, I would select CI and it will raise a CI for us so that we have an audit finding that needs to be addressed and assigned by a specific person so that they can actually address it. So your audit schedule will be under CMS, your audit checklist will be under checklist, and your continual improvement will be under continual improvement, your root cause analysis of that specific finding, if I can put it that way. Just want to see if here you can see there's a client audit that was raised. Normally what we do is we'll manually capture those client audits because they don't use Elint when they do the audits, but so that we can still track the closeouts. Here you can see was the internal audit that was raised to be addressed by Rudy at that point in time. And that's how we work with the system. So ultimately, your CMS, your compliance management system, will have all your different management measures that's required to make your management system work and ensure that your management system is actually tracked, the compliance and your compliance against that system is tracked. So when you do your management measure or your CMS, when you track your CMSs, what you need to make sure is that you actually capture it in a way that you can understand it and track it. So what I've done here, just a tip, you don't have to do it this way. So I've also captured the company's objectives and targets for their ISO systems as management measures so that we can track and see if they actually comply or implement those objectives and reach those objectives that they've set. So what I have done is I set on my compliance standard as an integrated management system, and my sub standard, or here it says workplace because I haven't changed that label, is the actual SHEC plan. Because under the SHEC plan, we normally have our targets and our objectives and targets. I also put opportunities in here as well, because if you do a risk assessment for ISO, you need to identify opportunities. So you can see we have our objectives, our different objectives, and we keep on adding to those objectives as and when we do our management reviews. And then if we go to the next page, you will start seeing opportunities. So this company, you can see their objectives is growing because they have achieved most of them, but that's because they've already used Elint for the last 5 years, and you have all your records in one place. And now you can see these opportunities. So we listed opportunities as well. And then obviously we've got our targets that we work against as well. And we just add to those targets as and when we have management reviews and we need to add to them. And then you can see I have actually identified OSHA specific requirements because this company also works in a very sensitive industry with the chemical industry. So there's specifics that they need to do from an Occupational Health and Safety Act, which they need to implement. Specifically, if you look at your inspections that they need to do. So those are all the inspections. And then you can see I've also added the training. So there's quite a bit of legal training that they need to do. And this training matrix has been audited by auditors. You don't need to have a separate training matrix. This is seen as your training matrix. So your training matrix can be easily audited and see whose training is outdated and who's actually done their training. I've split it just to make it easier what's external or what's internal. So you can see that's their training matrix. Then if the auditor needs to see the training matrix, for instance, as a separate document, or they need proof thereof, a printout, the administrator can go to the back end, go to data export, select the company, and we want the CMS because it's under CMS, and we generate it, and it will send the email to that user, and they can then send it on to the actual auditor. So if I just go back here, just want to recap. So in the back end, we set up a company, we set up users, we set up the templates for risk assessment, we set up the templates for monitoring reports if that's required, and we changed the lists, which is our drop downs for our continual improvement and our tasks. In the front end, we populate, or we do the calculation for the risk assessment. We make sure all our controls that we've listed is actually automated in the system in the following manners. We either do a document if it's a procedure or a work instruction. We do a checklist if there's a checklist attached to it. For a document and a checklist, we'll have a CMS to track the compliance of that specific document or that checklist. We have continual improvement. You don't have to have a separate accident investigation procedure, customer complaint procedure, because the whole continual improvement procedure, the whole setup of continual improvement, and please go and have a look at the tutorial, then you'll understand why, is automated. So you log it, it goes for review. You investigate it, it goes for approval. You implement corrective action, it goes again for approval, and then it goes to closeout. So, and all of these labels are controlled, so not everybody has got access to it. So the whole process flows through the way that the ISO or even an occupational health and safety investigation should be done. And that's why you don't need a procedure, because the procedure is actually automated. And then you can track your meetings. Obviously, you schedule them through your CMS, and you track the closeouts or the actions required through tasks, and then you can pull everything into dashboards to make sure that you can have a picture about what's going on in this business. And then just again, remember on checklists, you can raise continual improvements and tasks through your checklist. If you complete the checklist, it will mark off the monitoring. If you don't have a checklist to complete, but you have a CMS that needs to be done, you have to mark it off on the monitoring. So if I have a specific CMS, just quickly go through this one just to remind everybody. So say, for instance, I have this specific CMS that says review the risk assessment that we've just done. So there's a management measure that was created under CMS. It creates a monitoring task for me. I need to physically come in here and say it's done. So this was done 20th of the 1st. So I have to physically come in and say I have done the risk assessment review. I can make notes if I want to. So Again, please remember to have a look at how CMS and monitoring works together, and when a monitoring measure needs to be completed manually. Also, your monitoring reports that you've created, you need to link it to a CMS. If you link it to a CMS and you create your report, you complete your report, it will actually mark off the monitoring task for that CMS. So it's just checklists and monitoring reports that automatically marks it off. The rest needs to be done manually, and the system needs to know that it was done. And that's how we set up a system, and that's how we work with the system. It's integrated in the sense of saying, let's first have a look at the management system and see where there's overlapping of different requirements, and then see if you can actually have one policy instead of 3 different policies. I'm thinking specifically environment, quality, and health and safety. You don't need 3 policies, you just need one integrated policy. Emergency plan, add your environmental spillages to your emergency plan, then you only have one emergency plan. And for that, you'll have different CMSs that comes out of it, but it's an integrated system. And then you integrate your management system into different levels. So you give different functions to different people. And if you do it that way, you can also, at the end of the day, assign KPIs to those people that will manage your management measures, to see how well they are doing it. You can see, you can pull it per person, per user, and then you can see and do your compliance management in your as part of your KPIs, and you can then track their performance, and based on their performance, obviously your performance appraisal can be managed in this way as well, or at least some KPIs can be tracked in this way as well. If you need any assistance with your management system, you can please contact us. I will leave the details of Elint in the description of this video. And then also, we do have standard documentation. So we have mandatory documentation that we can also provide, which you can customize for your own business. We do have templates of checklists, and we do have templates of risk assessments that can be used and tweaked for your business if you want to, if that's going to be easier for you. But I strongly suggest that you start with your risk assessment, and then out of that, you can build the rest of your management system. Thank you.